Hello, everyone. We'll just give everyone about 30 seconds to join this broadcast, and we'll kick it off. Okay. Good afternoon. Well, for those of you on the West Coast, that is. We are Two Protons in a Cloud. It's a weekly live dialogue connecting industry experts to the online technical community. That's you. I'm Adrienne Kraft. I'm one of your hosts and a technical evangelist for HP Helion.
And I'm Sujay Maheshwari. I am a dev evangelist at HP Helion.
Perfect. And we're kicking off this series with episode 1 today. The goal is to boost conversation with our industry influencers, give genuine insight on some of the challenges, experiences, announcements happening in the developer space. So today, we're going to give you a few news bulletins in case you missed it, and then invite our first guest for the episode to dive into Cloud Foundry and provide you with some key takeaways. So we're excited, and so shall you be. So what's happening in the cloud other than customer visits and free t-shirts? Quite a bit. So Sujay, did you hear about the AWS glitch this past weekend?
Yeah. I think it happened Sunday morning, right, where there were dreaded 503 server errors on the East Coast, I guess, for about 5 hours.
Yeah. So obviously, computing in the cloud does not make you immune.
No. Officially, AWS stated that the error started with Amazon DynamoDB, which impacted customers, and then they saw bunch of APIs timing out, services built on AWS failing, and which meant customers could not access some sites.
Interesting. So obviously this happened in the early hours of Sunday morning. I was still sleeping. Imagine that impact had it been Monday morning.
Ouch! That would have hurt, yeah.
So CJ came up to visit me this weekend, and we are sitting in downtown Seattle, so felt the traffic impact of the Chinese president visiting the city.
Yep, very much. And he stressed fighting cybercrime is a high priority for China.
Yeah, so I think, for instance, he meant commercial cyber theft and hacking against government networks. Is that right?
Yep, very much. And he asked US to cooperate and work together, kind of stuff.
Awesome. So we'll see if, because he denied China's involvement in hacking activities, see if the collaboration against cybercrime does indeed go global.
Yep.
So, and Suji, have you heard of the Cape to Cape challenge?
No.
I thought this was a pretty interesting story. HP and Intel played a big part in a world record achievement on Sunday. The Cape to Cape 2.0 challenge, which is actually a grueling journey from South Africa to the tip of Norway. It's 19,000 kilometers, about 12,000 miles for those of us in the US who don't understand the metric system, or about 3 flights from Seattle to London. So it took 9 days, 4 hours, 8 minutes. Why does that even matter? So, Sujay, I thought the in-car connectivity that was maintained even in the most remote parts of the world was really interesting, and they had end-to-end security 24/7 in a Volkswagen Touareg. So sensors gathered 350 gigabytes of data, and I think it'll be interesting to see the analytics use cases that come out of that.
Sure, yeah, of course. I do have another cool news to share. So we know hackathons are cool, but after you hear this, they will be cooler. Did you hear about the Classroom for GitHub, a new open source tool?
Not yet, no.
All right, so basically it was a hackathon project where now teachers can invite students onto GitHub where they share a unique URL for a student, and now the students can do their assignments, share their assignments, view, modify, collaborate, all the good stuff right onto GitHub. So it's a new tool freely available to all of us. Go GitHub, yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people wish they had that when they were in college. So that should
Yeah.
help. Another one, the Cloud Foundry Foundation announced on Tuesday that the Korean government is the latest to join. And I would tell you more, but I saw that the announcement is currently in Korean, so can't help with that. Thus, we move on to the meat of this episode. So our episode today is Think You Know Everything About Cloud Foundry. To test us and the audience, we've invited Gert Drapers to kick off episode 1. So Gert is our distinguished engineer and engineering director for the HP Helion Cloud Foundry project. He applies 25 plus years of operating system, compiler, database, and distributed systems experience to enhance the enterprise application landscape by leveraging and contributing to Cloud Foundry, Kubernetes, and the Docker ecosystems. So thank you, Gert, for joining us today.
Yep.
Welcome.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
And to start off, can you tell us a little bit more about your role and your current focus areas?
Sure, thank you. So I think you already spilled some beans because it's like by the long introduction. It's like, but my main role is like I'm focusing on the Cloud Foundry project and building up the Helion Cloud Foundry distribution. So HP's distribution of the Cloud Foundry project. And we do that through a distributed team of engineers, which actually makes it a lot more fun that way. And we can also incorporate some of the more available skill sets that we have across the world. And so one of the things we're really trying to focus on at the moment is how we can increase our contributions to the Cloud Foundry project, and really in the area of enterprise readiness and manageability. One of the other aspects is like one of the big contributions that we made during the Cloud Foundry Summit in May was adding, for example, the Windows ecosystem to the Cloud Foundry world. And that was mainly driven from two reflections. One was our customers, roughly, depending on how you count, but based on our data, between 40 and 45% of the workloads are actually Windows workloads. And we wanted to offer those customers the same capabilities and experiences using a PaaS based on Cloud Foundry as if they would be using Linux.
Right.
And so that was one of the things I started off doing when I joined HP a little bit over a year ago now, and adding that capability to the product. And right now I'm very much involved with the foundation on getting to our next milestone, which at the Cloud Foundry Summit will lead to some exciting announcements that we will do that I will not spill the beans on, because otherwise why would we have a summit, right? But it promises to be a very interesting summit with a lot of exciting news, so that's very cool.
Right, we're excited.
Lovely. So for the audience benefit, Gert, can you describe what Cloud Foundry is and the PaaS we are diving into today?
Sure. So the PaaS, and specifically Cloud Foundry, a PaaS means a lot of different things to different people, and it's like also based on different vendors coined the term slightly differently, right? But it's, first of all, it's like, let's take the acronym as it is. It's like it's a platform, right? And a platform that is offered as a service. So what does that mean for a developer? Well, first of all, a developer wants to write code and wants to deploy that code with the least amount of friction. That's one of the things. Like, I've been working in environments where it's like we've been writing code, and then the code was handed over to an operations team, and it literally took months for them to actually get this into production, right? And surprisingly enough, a lot of our customers and people around the world are still facing those very rudimentary challenges today. And so what the Cloud Foundry PaaS actually tries to do is provide you a workflow to make that easier.
Yep.
And so one of the ways that it does that is like, well, what is the first thing as a developer, right? It's like, what was the first thing that you needed if you needed to deploy your app? Well, I know what my request always was to my manager. Can I have more machines?
Yeah.
And then it's like you needed to go to procurement or to somebody to give a machine to you, and somebody needed to set it up, and it took days, sometimes months.
Yeah, and needless to say, filling out of all the forms and approvals and all the good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the same as expense reports. I don't do that. But you're right. It's like the amount of work to actually get this done is just annoying for developers, and it's like it hinders their productivity. So the first thing that Cloud Foundry tries to solve is like, hey, we're going to deploy this into a cluster of resources where it's like you just push your app. And so one of the other interesting things is the symmetry between the GitHub workflow, or the workflow popularized by GitFlow, or GitHub and Git, I should say, is like the developer works and he does a commit, and then he does, when he's like, after he's done and it's like it all works for him, he says push.
Yep.
Right? And what Cloud Foundry allows you to do is push your application into the cluster, and what that will do is like it will package it up, hand it over to the cluster, run it through something that's called a build pack, and that will detect what language you are using and associate the runtime to it, so it actually can build a distribution for you. Now, what just happened is amazing, because it takes a lot of the mechanics of deploying the app out of the hands of the developer, right? And it brings the payload into the cluster. So after Cloud Foundry is done, it's like what we call staging the application, it can create one or more instances. And that's another magical thing that the developer now doesn't have to worry about. It's like, should I create one instance, or can I scale this up to 5 because my app is so popular? Now, what it doesn't do is like there's one piece of magic that doesn't offer, of course, right? You still have to make sure your app is written so it can scale. Right?
Yeah.
It's like if you have shared state, it's like if you're architecting your application incorrectly, it's like, yeah, that's not really going to help you. But we have an answer for that too.
Right. So I think what you are emphasizing here is your code still needs to be written very well. You cannot write bad code and just depend on the cloud.
Yes, I think there is this saying, garbage in, garbage.
Yes.
Right, and the cloud doesn't change that. It comes out of the different ends, right?
Right.
Or it's like if some sticker of one of the guys in my team is like the cloud is just somebody else's computer. Right.
That's a good one. We should note that down, Adrian. It's a good one.
And so, but at the end, it's like, so it really matters how developers build their application. And actually, it's like Cloud Foundry has a manifest called the 12-factor application.
Right.
That helps developers think through how they should set up their application.
Right.
So now, once they follow these sort of guidelines of how to factor and how to bring your application, it really enables them to push their application into the cluster, scale it up, scale it out. And so that's the first win for a developer. They don't have to think about infrastructure. They don't have to think about deployment that much. It's like, now let's talk about the next step in their application. How many applications do you know that don't use, say, a database or a messaging system?
None. They should be using database or something.
Exactly. It's like most real life applications use some form of application service, right?
Yep.
A database, a queuing system, a cache.
Yep.
Now, how did you normally work this into your application?
Oh God. You contact a DBA, they get approvals, provision a database, they give you a connection string, and you put the connection string in your web.config, and then
Exactly, right? It is like, so again, paperwork, figuring out where to get it, who to connect to, etc. So Cloud Foundry has, in my opinion, a very interesting capability, which is called a service broker. And what that allows you to do is, like, from your app, is like you decide, like, hey, I'm using Oracle, or I'm using MySQL, or Redis, or whatever service that you would want to use.
Yeah.
Now, how do you make that? How do you get this into your application? Well, if you don't know where your app will be running, how do you know where this app service resides?
Right.
So you need some kind of handshake, which is what the broker exactly does. All right, so think about it as DNS for application services. Right. I bind my application to a logical name, and that logical name is like you bind your application to, and what happens is, like, at runtime, Cloud Foundry gives you all the information needed to connect to this application service. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to build applications that are truly transparent in terms of where they run, how many instances they run, and how they actually bind to their dependencies. Right. And so that creates not only a benefit for the developer, of course, because the developer focuses on writing their app,
right,
but it also helps the other person, right? And we all know about it's like you still need ops, right? And they've been trying to push that into the developer shoes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But it's like, what is that ops person? He's not interested in the application. He just wants to manage the cattle farm, as I call it.
Right.
He doesn't want to know that this is banking and this is invoices and this is accounts receivable and like he just wants to look at it's like, well, it's like there are all these processes. Are they running? Are they fine? So that's how he wants to look at the world. He wants uniformity.
Right. So as I hear, it is certainly changing the developer and the ops both landscape. Isn't that right?
Exactly. Right. It's like, and I was just going to get into this. Like, so all these benefits for the developer, right? Is like, of course, they could come at a price for the ops person. Right. But what really is like Cloud Foundry does for the ops person is like he turns their set of resources into, say, a cattle farm, right? You know the analogy between kettles and pets, right?
Yeah.
So I'm from the Netherlands, so I know a lot about cattle. Right.
And I'm from India, so I also should be knowing a lot about cattle, so yeah.
Well, so I live next to a farm, and it's like, I don't know how many cattle my neighbor had, but it's like there were enough, and it's like, I know one thing for sure, they didn't have names.
Yes.
Right? And now we also had pets, of course, and they had names, and they were cared for in a different way. But anyhow, it's like for the ops person, it's like he really wants to leverage his compute resources as cattle.
Yes.
Right? And so that's what Cloud Foundry allows it to do. Is like if one of the nodes dies, you don't go repair it.
Right.
You take it out. Right? You replace it.
Yep.
And by doing that, it creates a very repeatable system. Because if you take out a DEA, which is the droplet execution agent, which runs your application instance, and say it's like you wrote your app reliably, so you have, say, 3 instances running. And now one DEA decides it's like he doesn't like it anymore, so he stops responding. Basically, you take him out, and you start up a new one. Or if you need more capacity, you bring in new ones.
Right.
And your app will automatically be rolled out on that. And so that makes the life of both the developer as well as the ops person much easier because there is uniformity and repeatability in the system. And that actually creates reliability, and that increases the availability of your app. So at the end of the day, the CEO is also happy, right? Because it's like his assets are up and running at a lower cost because like he can achieve more density,
right?
At a higher availability, at a lower management cost,
right?
Because Cloud Foundry takes care of a lot of those aspects. The last thing that actually feeds into this is like you were a developer,
Yep.
So how much time did you spend writing logging routines?
Oh, don't get me started. Yeah.
Right? Or
Yeah.
or is like performance counters?
Oh God. Yeah. And
I know it's like in my world they were always the afterthought.
yes.
Right? And one
Always.
of the things that Cloud Foundry does, it's like it makes logging and health monitoring, it's like it's baked into the system.
Lovely.
So the developer still has to write out the information, but he
Right.
doesn't have to worry how it gets centralized and how it gets transferred from
Right.
the node where you're running the app to a central location, and how we do aggregation and how we determine metrics.
Right. Right.
And so this combined creates a truly interesting and highly efficient experience for developers and ops people. And that's, I think, what the value add of Cloud Foundry really is.
Absolutely. No
Amazing.
love-hate relationship.
Right. This.
There is love and hate. It's everywhere, right?
It should be there, I guess. So I want to switch, and this was brilliant. I mean, we loved hearing from you. So I want to switch gears a little, and I keep hearing all these projects, all these Cloud Foundry projects which work with Cloud Foundry, like Dockers, Kubernetes, Mesos, OpenStack. So according to you, how do they stack up in the entire ecosystem and with Cloud Foundry per se?
Yeah. It's a very popular question, right?
Yes.
It's like we have all these new acronyms that are coming out of the woodworks. Some of them claiming to be a PaaS itself, right? Some of them cooperating or taking over other pieces. So it's a super exciting time to begin with. It's like as an engineer specifically, right? It's like, so let's take some of them and sort of take them apart, right? It's like, so let's look at Docker. I think that's probably the biggest buzzword in the trending on Google, right?
Yeah.
So what Docker has done is truly amazing, right? It looked at the same problem in terms of like, what does a developer do? It's like, how do I package my application? How do I distribute this? And they made this truly, it's like they made this really efficient, both from a packaging mechanism as from a hosting mechanism, and then the capabilities that came out of that, which like, you only change the layers that need changing. I can have insight in what all the layers are. It's like I have a hub where I can distribute these things. So if you look at how Cloud Foundry and Docker, it's like how these two things relate, is like you see more and more that Docker is becoming an integral part or an option inside Cloud Foundry, right? We're moving to, in the next release of Cloud Foundry, it's like we're actually adopting Run C, which is the sort of one level up from Docker, which is the open runtime that came out of the container initiative.
Yes.
As the underpinnings for one of the runtime cells, or the cell that runs your application in the next version of Cloud Foundry. So I see Docker largely complementary to what Cloud Foundry does, right?
Right.
It also teaches us what is important, I think, from a customer point of view. Now, one thing that is like Docker is great if you have one node, right? But as you also see from projects that evolve around that, it's like if you want to do more, if you want to run a cluster, or if you want to run an application that's composed out of multiple microservices, not all necessarily from one shape or flavor, it's like the world is a bit more complicated, right? Which is why you see an explosion of projects around this, like Docker Swarm. It's like you see Kubernetes, right? It's something that Google created on top of Docker, which all do the same thing in terms of orchestrating applications and services made out of Docker instances.
Right.
And so if there is one learning, I think that is like where Cloud Foundry, it's like where it's like we need to evolve to, and it's like there are actually lively discussions, and there is work on its way already, is like how do we think about composed applications?
Mm-hmm.
Right. One of the things I think we can learn from Kubernetes is the concept of a pod. And a pod really allows you to describe a constellation of microservices that form logically one service for a business, and that you want to be able to reason over as in terms of uptime and how do you access it and how do you secure it, etc. So there are things we can learn from it, certainly, right? It's like these projects all have their merit. Now, it's like I think none of them are as complete in terms of providing the workflow, providing the capabilities, etc. Now, it certainly is like we need to pay attention to what all these other things are doing.
Right.
Another one that you called out, which of course is very close to HP's heart, is like OpenStack, right?
Yes. Yes.
Now, OpenStack as a project so far has been really focused on infrastructure.
Correct.
Right, it provides networking, compute, basic block storage, object storage, etc.
Yeah.
Now, with the introduction of Project Magnum, it's like it tries to start moving into is like hosting a container, but it's nowhere near the maturity of a Cloud Foundry yet. But it's like it's where the two worlds will meet, right? It's like what we'll constantly see inside the industry is that the division between an infrastructure layer and a platform service layer is they're going to get closer together, and at some point they might even start to overlap, and we just have to accept that. And I think that's great for customers because it's like that actually allows them to benefit and run at higher densities and at lower cost, right? Because that's all what we need. Now, one of them is like that I think you called out Mesos, right?
Yes.
Is one of that's a very interesting project. So I spent quite some time on that recently in terms of how do we reason about Mesos. And for those of you who doesn't know what Mesos does, Mesos is effectively it's a resource scheduler. And what does that mean? So think about it's like I have a data center and I have 1,000 computers in there, right? 1,000 nodes, and I want to be able. I don't want to dedicate 500 to run big data and 500 to run my applications. I want to reason about that as one big resource pool, and I want to be able to dynamically make those available. And that's what Mesos allows you to do. So it does that through what's called a two-phase scheduling mechanism, whereas like the first layer, which is I reason over all my resources, is something that Mesos does. And then you have frameworks that plug into this that can ask for resources, like a big data project or environment through Spark, for example, is an implementation. And we're actually working on how can we plug in Kubernetes or Cloud Foundry style applications into Mesos and have them participate in this larger thing. Now, it's like that results in that the boundaries of where things happen might have to be aligned. And so we're right now in the middle of learning and figuring out, is there value? We believe there is. And then it's like the next question is, how do we get this into the project, which is in the Cloud Foundry style, like, okay, then we need to start working broadly in the community because there are lots of opinions and requirements to be met to actually make this a successful part of the product. But I think there is actually a future in that.
So to kind of close, we've got a developer following for Cloud Foundry, and in their manifesto they talk about no vendor lock-in. So it's open, it's customizable. But with so many moving parts in the tech stack, IoT, containers, mobile, do you think Cloud Foundry can keep up? And in your opinion, is it ripe for adoption?
So there are a couple of things in your question. I'm going to start with the last one. Is it ready for adoption? Actually, my answer to that is hell yes. It's like it certainly is. We've had customers that looked at this and then said we're going to try build our own because we think we can do this. And then after 3 or 6 months, they came back to us and said this was actually very hard.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that is like we have to build in terms of orchestration, in terms of user access control, authorization, logging, aggregation, health monitoring, scheduling mechanisms. All these things are built in. Now, I think the transition that Cloud Foundry is in is the realization that is like right now a lot of these pieces are built in, but the batteries are not necessarily always replaceable.
Right.
Right. I'm a true believer of the strategy is like batteries included, but not required. Right. And so if I want to bring my own batteries because like I like rechargeable ones, it's like I should be able to do that.
Yeah.
And so there are places in Cloud Foundry today where this is true, but not all the pieces where everybody cares about are yet pluggable. So I think after Diego, which really is the overhaul of the runtime, which is finishing up right now, which will be the foundation for the next release of Cloud Foundry, I think there will be more focus on the extensibility and how to truly make it that the platform, where possible, coheres to the batteries included but not required strategy, and allows us to also cater to the more special places or the evolving requirements like IoT. It's like, yeah, it's like, would I say it's like, are we ready for IoT? I know there are projects live that service IoT environments. Can we do better? I believe so. But it's like because it's also a very new area that's where the requirements are still evolving.
Right. Lovely. So we are also coming to the end of the episode. So I have this one last question, and this is my personal pet peeve because I have been a developer, and we touched upon it a little bit. This love-hate relationship between a developer and an ops community was there and will be there, but how will this dynamics change with the projects we spoke about, and what should a developer and an ops expect going forward?
It's an interesting thing, right? It's like will they evolve? It's like as I said earlier, I think one is about the ops person is about uniformity and repeatability.
Right.
Right, because that allows him to scale and be efficient and also be effective, because it's like he knows in which situation what needs to happen. Right, and the other part is automation. Right, it's like the ops person is like that job exists like and makes it really work around automation, and I think that's what all the projects are really trying to emphasize. And it's like in terms of like, hey, if you can automate something, it becomes repeatable. It probably becomes more reliable, assuming that the code was any decent. All right, but it's so that actually I think is goodness. I think for the developer, it's like he will be less worried about the ops person, because he doesn't have to go and ask anymore, right?
Yep.
He's guided by the system, and it's like in terms of like, hey, I'm going to deploy. He should not have to worry about the fact that we're running low on resources or where the app is going to be staged.
Right.
And that removes a lot of the friction.
Right.
And it allows the other thing that it allows the app developer to do is just pump out version after version. And this is like I find when discussing with customers and developers, it seems counterintuitive. Right? It's like always is like, why do we want to go faster and faster and faster? It's like, well, for one reason, the faster I get things out there, the quicker I get validation.
Right.
And if my competitor only deploys once a month, I can make 30 mistakes more than my competitor and still win.
Absolutely.
Right, and it's like it really allows you in this age where it's like there is no sustained competitive advantage. It's like it really allows companies to be on the ball and to be responsive to their needs.
Yes.
And I think that's what really is like what systems like this mean to a company, right? And that's why these developers are building the software, right?
Absolutely. And we have all heard stories where Amazon deploys every 6 seconds. Netflix deploy whenever they can. Chaos monkeys and all that good stuff. So absolutely, we are heading in that world. So this was lovely, Adrian.
Definitely. Thank you, Gert. We're truly pleased. We're extremely grateful that we were able to grab some of your time for these candid conversations. And I definitely learned. I know Sujay did. And you gave a great view of how Cloud Foundry is positioned.
Yeah.
So a reminder to our audience, Sujay and I will be heading to San Francisco next week. Using this insight gained from the episode for the first ever Cloud Foundry Doc Sprint. We'll also be doing a meetup immediately following, introducing you to Cloud Foundry, talking about the documentation, and deploying cloud-native applications. So as always, we encourage the audience's questions, comments, episode ideas. I know, Gert, you'll probably be available if someone comes in with a question about what you spoke about. And we look forward to everyone tuning in next week.
Yes, and don't forget that you will find this episode and all our future episodes on YouTube, and you already see our Twitter handle behind Adrian, so follow us there. Ciao.
All right.
Thank you
you,
again,
guys.
Gert. And have a great afternoon, everybody.